Okay, so welcome to the AWS Boston User Group, aka the Boston Meetup, aka the Boston User Group. We're here, and we're going to be talking about S3 at scale, and we're going to do a Code Whisperer demo. So hope folks enjoy that. Please jump in with questions along the way. So this is how you contact us. And we want to thank our sponsors. We would be hard pressed to do this without our sponsors. If you would like to be a sponsor and become famous by being on this page for 4 seconds, please contact us.
Disclaimer, you will not become famous.
Yes.
And the 4 seconds live forever in YouTube videos. So,
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. Okay. So we're going to talk about S3 well, I'm going to be talking about S3 at scale, which is sort of a bit of a hodgepodge of random topics that you run into when you are playing with S3 in the large. And I'll say everybody says, oh, we do big data. And okay, fine. The S3 environment that I'm going to be talking about was millions, actually hundreds of millions of objects and very large number of petabytes of data. So things really do change at that scale. And then we're also going to do a live demo of Code Whisperer. Code Whisperer is very similar to GitHub's Copilot. It's basically, in general, we don't say AI, but this is AI. This is AI programming, or programming by AI. Let's see. I'm the co-organizer of this group, and I'm a community hero, and I have the world's coolest glasses, thanks to Farah. And the batteries haven't run out yet, which is really nifty. And yes, is that a Planky or a Williams GIF?
That's a Williams GIF, of course.
Okay, cool.
Come on now.
Okay.
The other Chris is way too serious to put that in there.
Okay. So let me just grab this. Okay. So S3 at scale. And I've got so many monitors going that if I run this in presentation mode, I don't know where the windows are going to show up. So there you go. When I've been doing S3, I've sort of just, the first S in S3 stands for simple, but I think that's really not true. Once you get under the covers, it's really the sophisticated storage system. But there you go. So we're going to talk about, so these are the items we're going to talk about. How to get the most out of your most performance using prefixes, understanding versioning in S3, looking at storage classes and intelligent tiering, which are different things, life cycles, which can be very interesting when you're talking about a large number of objects. Inventory and batch are ways to get at those large number of objects. Object locks are a way to protect your data against ransomware. And storage lens is a way to look and see what are you actually doing with S3. And if you're just sort of playing about with S3, you can probably skip all of this. But when you're doing it in the large, this becomes really, really necessary. So, prefixes. This is one of these bits of information that either and it's like, well, yeah, of course, or it's like, say what? We know that S3 looks like a file system, but it's really just a key value pair or bucket key association. So the delimiters happen to be slashes, so it looks like a file system, but all the parts of the your what looks like directory structure underneath the bucket is really just a key. Now, for performance at the high level, you can do 3,500 write operations or 5,500 get operations per prefix. Okay, so if you need now for most applications, 5,500 gets a second. That's crazy. Why would I ever, how could I possibly even approach needing that for my little, Alexa skill? I'm doing probably 3 gets a second, but when you get into really big data, which is often genomic data, that kind of thing, 5,500 gets a second is not enough. And so those are the limits per prefix. So if you look down here, I'm just making these are buckets from, or this is a bucket for my Premier League skill. And I could do 5,500 gets of stadiums and also 5,500 gets of things under teams at the same time. So how you set up your prefixes really matters if you're going for the large data. Now, the prefix is basically everything up to your last slash. Now, one of the things that and this is one of the places where you need to think ahead, and that a lot of people will separate their data in their RC buckets by date. That's actually a terrible thing to do from a performance point of view, because you're going to generally be looking at the most recent data. So you may have a wide spread of keys, but you've got an incredible hotspot. So I'm not giving you any answers here. I'm just saying, if you're doing reads and writes in the large, think about this and think about how you want to set up your prefixes. Okay. So now we jump over to versioning. And again, by default, S3 buckets, objects in S3 buckets, don't have versioning turned on. Technically, all objects have a version. It's just null, which is sort of an interesting way of saying, yeah, they don't have version. One of the things to keep in mind with S3 is that there's actually no such thing as an update. Objects in S3 are always write once, read many. Okay, so if you do a put on an object that doesn't have a version, it looks for all the world like it's a replace, but it's really, it looks for all the world like it's an update, but it's really a replace. There's no such thing as, you'll notice there's no such thing as, edit an object. There's put. So if your object isn't versioned, you're just doing a replace. If you're doing, if you've got a versioned bucket, then you're creating a brand new object, and the old object is still there, but it has a version. So one of the things to watch out for with versioning is that every time you do a put, you create a new copy. So if you do 100 puts, you're going to have 100 copies of the object. Now, again, in the small, this may not matter to you, but if you're putting lots and lots of really big objects, you can balloon your total S3 cost tremendously. And normally, if you don't have to specify the version, and that always means that you're just working on the latest version, but you can get at the previous versions. And so this is one of the recommended ways to avoid accidental corruption of files. And if you have versions and someone puts a corrupted version of the file up in the system, you can always delete it and get back to a previous one. But you're still paying for it. Okay. And jumping ahead a little bit, but every version of an object can have its own storage class and its own locking. And so it'll have a life cycle, it'll have a cost, and you want to be able to pay attention to that. So this just shows that you can do, a get, if you say I want, the key is photo.gif, well, you get whatever, whatever the top one is, it's 12, 12, 12. You can say I want photo.gif, 11, 11, 11, and then you get the older version. So you can go back and get it. It just takes a little bit, a slightly different API call, but you can get it. This isn't something that's done commonly. And so, it's usually done after there's a mistake has been made, quite honestly. And so it's not going to be in your normal repertoire of tools. So when you have to do this, you're probably going to, look up how to do the API call. Because it's, and you're probably going to be under pressure because it's probably after someone has made a mistake. And what you want to make sure is that you don't make another mistake. You don't want to make the problem worse. Same for deletes. You can say, delete, if you just say delete, you're deleting the top version of the item. You can say delete with with an identifier. I mean, actually, if you say delete without specifying an ID, all it actually does is create a delete marker. So it can be, you can get into this interesting situation where if you've got an object that has lots of versions in it, and you try to delete all the versions, I'll say from experience, you can get into a situation where all you do is create lots and lots of delete markers. And so there's some trickiness to doing an actual delete that isn't just the creation of a marker, which is just another version. So version deletes, again, can be kind of tricky. So these are more just, hey, there be dragons, pay attention. Hopefully you don't have to worry about this. It's funny. I spent today working on a completely different issue where it just turns out, oh, you can't do that. And another part of the day was, oh yeah, there's this huge caveat to that thing. So I feel like we're providing at least some bit of a service of saying, hey, this can get weird. It isn't necessarily you if it isn't working the first time. It's definitely a little bit spooky. I have to go to the Robert Wilson. So storage classes. I will say at a previous company of mine, S3 was fully 50% of our cloud spend. So it can get serious. You can spend tens of millions of dollars on S3. So there are storage classes that let you basically make trade-offs between cost and performance. Now, one of the assumptions that often turns out not to be true, one of the assumptions is that you know what the usage patterns of your objects are. You would think that most companies would say, oh yeah, these objects I use all the time, these objects hardly ever, and these objects never. But very often, the way it actually turns out is that people don't really know. So it becomes a discovery process. Okay, so let's look at the storage classes, and there's a whole bunch of them. And I'll say this is standard access, which is what you get normally, infrequent access, and these last three their names have changed recently. This is Glacier instant retrieval, which is sort of an oxymoron, because when Glacier first came out, it was Glacier for those files that you never touch, and it's okay if we take 2 days to get to them. So Glacier instant retrieval is kind of an odd duck. God, I'm totally blanking on what GFRs is. This is GDA, Glacier Deep Archive. Glacier Flexible Retrieval. Okay, so the interesting column here, the last two columns are actually sort of the most interesting in that the first three columns, your response time is milliseconds. Okay, so for standard, infrequent, and Glacier, you can get millisecond access. Glacier flexible retrieval, minutes or hours. Glacier deep archive is absolutely hours, maybe a bunch of hours. But look at the price savings. So, standard is 100%. If you go to infrequent, you save about half the cost. Okay, you can go to Glacier Instant, you're down to 17% of the cost that it would have been under standard. Interestingly, you don't save much going to flexible retrieval, and you save a ton more going to deep archive. But here's where you can get caught. Look at this middle line, the retrieval charge. All of these charge you by the gigabyte to retrieve, except for standard access. So one of the standard mistakes that companies make is they say, hey, I'm going to toss everything into infrequent access because I don't know what's really accessed, what's frequent access and what's not frequent access. And then someone accesses all that information and you get whacked with a retrieval charge. And companies, those bills can be enormous. So, excuse me, sorry. You can save a lot of money if you know that you're really, really not going to access these objects. But there's a twist to the story in the next slide. Oh, and there's the second line is just once you put something into one of these storage classes, it has to stay there for a certain amount of time. So like if you stick something in deep archive, you get charged for 180 days, even if you take it out after 1 day. So there's a bunch of maneuvering to do in here. Okay. Now we get to intelligent tiering. And intelligent tiering is a storage class. It's a complex storage class. Within intelligent tiering, within the intelligent tiering storage class, there are tiers that almost exactly correspond to the tiers we saw just a moment ago. Okay. Intelligent tiers, objects in intelligent tiering transition between the tiers based on the time of last access. So it's not based on the time of creation, it's the time of last access. So you put something in standard access, after 30 days, it goes to infrequent, after 60 more days, it goes to Glacier, and optionally Glacier Instant Access, optionally it can go to the other ones. So like we said, there's the three normal tiers and then the 2 deeper ones. So all the metrics are the same for under intelligent tiering, except for the very, very most important one. Look at the green. The green is where you save millions. If you are in intelligent tiering infrequent access, you still only pay essentially half, but there is no retrieval cost. This is one of these things that can save your company millions of dollars, but it's so counterintuitive. People say, how can they do that? How can they possibly charge you half the amount and still give you the same performance? Well, they do. I mean, this is simply, we've done experiments. Amazon has confirmed it. They simply do. My prediction is that intelligent tiering becomes the default storage class. Maybe this reInvent. I think it should. So if you set things to intelligent tiering and only use these top 3 levels, then you don't need to know what your usage pattern is. Those objects that are used all the time, well, they'll just stay here in standard access. Objects you don't use, objects that you use, once a month or so, they'll probably make it down here to infrequent access. Things that you don't use for a total of 90 days, you're saving 83% without having to really understand what your pattern is. So this is something that I think everybody should do. Any questions on this? Because I spent about 6 months trying to convince some people at a previous company that this was the case.
Vlad actually had a question.
Sure, go ahead.
It's in the thread. How long ago did you measure performance with respect to prefixes? According to this new link, there's no need to randomize prefixes anymore. Is that now the case or not? Looks like the article was made in 2022, 06/27, so 2 months ago.
Okay, I'm going to go back and check that, because and here's the trick. An article with just about that same title was put out about 2 years ago, and that article was absolutely true and completely misleading in that they made a change, so you absolutely didn't need to randomize the prefix, except that you did. So I want to read this new article, because it'd be great if they fix that. But I haven't seen the article, so but thank you. This is great. I'd love to be wrong. Chris, you're going to let that go without a comment?
I am not going to say anything about that. I applaud you for. I mean, without doing additional research, I can't give you a ration of crap for this. So we'll have to check back later. as much as I want to give you a ration.
Okay, cool. And there's also a question about minimum size. Yes. Okay. So that makes another great point about minimum size. So it's interesting. You only save it's only large objects that cost you a lot of money. Little objects don't hardly cost anything. So when you go to intelligent tiering, one thing I didn't put in here is that there is a small management fee per object that's looked at. So if you had all small objects, then you wouldn't have the cost savings, and you would have the management fee. But objects below a certain criterion size, and I think it's 128K, intelligent tiering ignores. So if you have lots of really small objects, sure, mark them all as IT, but it's not really going to put them in IT, because you're never going to save any money, and they save you from that shooting yourself in the foot. So that's another place where, yes, it's true. If you have lots of little objects, you could cost yourself a lot of money, but they won't turn it on for those really tiny objects. And one of the things you can do is just say, only turn on intelligent tiering for objects that are over, a megabyte. Yeah. Yep, that's common. We had a bunch of 32K objects got billed at 128K. Yep, absolutely. Okay, moving on. Moving on, because we also have the Code Whisperer. So how do you get between the storage classes? You can do it manually, or you can do it versus a life cycle. A life cycle is a rule that you put on the bucket. It can be important to note, life cycle rules are based on an object's creation time, whereas intelligent tiering is based on access time. So you have to pay attention to that. And intelligent tiering, and the intelligent tiering access time starts when you mark an object as intelligently tiered. So let's suppose you have an object that's 7 years old, and you want to say, after 7 years, move it to the Glacier Deep Archive. If you just used intelligent tiering, you would have to wait another 7 years, because it's based on the marking of it as being an intelligent tiering essentially counts as an access, which is weird. And that's why you want to use life cycles. And this is where it starts getting, a little complex. Okay. But I'm going to show you that in just a sec. When you set up lifecycle rules on the bucket, they take effect at midnight UTC. Interestingly, Amazon has no service level agreement on how long it takes. So at this infamous previous company, we said, what if we turn on transitions on 100 million objects? And Amazon said, well, those rules will take effect at midnight. And they said, and we said, and when will they finish taking effect? And they said, we have no idea. They said, well, probably 5 days, might be 7 days. We don't know. So again, if you're dealing with enormous number of objects, it can take a while. An interesting caveat is this last one. You can use a lifecycle rule to translate from standard access to intelligent tiering, but you cannot go back the other way. So if you have moved things to intelligent tiering with a lifecycle rule, you can't do a lifecycle rule to bring them back if you ever wanted to. Now, it's hard to imagine why you would ever want to, but management likes to ask that kind of questions, and it's good to be able to fess up. Okay. So these are the transitions you can do. You can move the current version of an object between these classes. Remember, we talked about versions. There's also the previous versions. You can move non-current versions between the classes. You can specify how many numbers of versions you should keep. One of the attack patterns that people really haven't talked about is it's called denial of wallet, which is sort of an interesting term in that if a bad actor got access to your system, they could create, it might be the easiest way to attack you might be to delete your objects, but a more insidious way would be just create an enormous number of versions of your biggest objects, which would hit you in the wallet. And it's probably something you wouldn't notice. That's why I tell my kids all the time, denial of wallet. It's a wonderful term, I think. So you can do a life cycle. This is, I only want to keep 2 versions. So you'd be safe from that level of attack. You can also say, hey, after a certain amount of time, just get rid of my versions. I don't care about them at all. And you can say, get rid of the non-current version. So there's a lot in here. If you really are interested in this, this is just a high-level primer, and I'd be happy to talk with anyone who wants to do this in depth, but there's an enormous amount of information here that's worth knowing about. I said earlier, sometimes the lifecycle rules don't have enough granularity. You can use Amazon S3 inventory to get a list of all the objects in your bucket, all the objects, all the versions, all the life cycles of the intelligent tiering rules. And so basically inventory will generate a list in a couple different formats, CSV and I think Parquet. And then you can pass that list to batch, and batch will let you perform operations on an enormous list of objects. So batch can do a number of things, but only a number of things. But one of the things it can do is escape to Lambda. So you can write a batch operation that says, for every object that inventory listed, run this Lambda against it. This is also another way to generate possibly hundreds of millions of Lambda calls. So, you have to sort of pick your poison there. And I'm going to, just in the interest of time, I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, but you can create, inventory report. Do I care about versions? How many additional fields do I want to look at? Do I want to look at, for example, object lock, and so on, CSV, orc, I mean, I'm not even sure what that format is, or Parquet. Excuse me. These are the things you can do on an inventory report. There's your invoke Lambda. You can do various tagging things. You can do various object locky things. But there isn't directly a change storage class, which is sort of the one you want. Okay. That's it for sort of the cost side of things. So now we're going to look at object lock. So let me ask the question: how bad would it be to your company if tomorrow morning all your S3 data was gone, or encrypted, or held hostage?
That would be fine. Oh wait, no, that's the wrong answer.
Right. For most companies, that's an existential, that's an extinction level event. Service control policies, ACLs, user policies, and so on are fine. But one of the tenets of security is defense in depth, and assume that everything can be broken, and assume that everything will be hacked. Object lock is the one thing that, again, I suppose if you do it right, object lock, if you turn on the maximum protections, it cannot be defeated. If you turn on object lock in a particular mode, neither you nor admin nor Amazon can get rid of that object. And there are lots of caveats for that, obviously. So there's two main modes. Governance mode, which is basically, oh, sorry, I said, when you turn on object lock, you're basically saying this object can't be deleted. It also, yeah, it can't be deleted. Now, governance mode says it absolutely no way can be deleted unless you happen to have this permission. Well, yay, if you're assuming that someone is getting into your system, assume that they're going to grab their permission, I think. But if you're in compliance mode, nobody can delete the object. Now, no one can delete the object for how long? Well, that's the retention period. So you say, I want an object lock in compliance mode for 3 months. After 3 months, it's fair game. But for those 3 months, nobody can touch it. And so you have to be careful. In a call with Amazon, they told a story of this company that said, hey, we have 100 petabytes of data, and we want to keep it for sure. And we're going to put an object lock on it for 7 years. They push go. And then they said, oh, wait a minute. That was the wrong copy of the data. And Amazon said, sorry, you're paying us for 7 years for that 100 petabytes of data because compliance mode is unbreakable. So you want to pay attention to it. There's also this notion of a legal hold that says, I don't really want a retention period. I want it locked until I say otherwise. But again, all you need is this one permission to disable it. So these are all fine. Compliance mode is the heavy gun. Okay. And one of the things that we suggest to people is if you're not sure if your objects ever get updated, turn things on in governance mode with a short retention period. If everything works fine, great. If you discover that, oh my God, I've got some object that I really do need to delete, well, turn this privilege back on and delete it, and change which objects are locked. So there are ways to sort of ease your way into the deep water. Okay, having said all that, then there's storage lens. Storage lens lets you look at your S3 objects and your spend. So in this particular case, I've got a couple hundred gigabytes, 500,000 of storage, 500,000 objects, a bunch of buckets. I can see that my total storage, was going down. My object count is going up. My object size is going down, which is really quite interesting. So, it's like, I actually want to dig into this. You can get quite a lot of information here. There's more metrics. This one tells me that I've got a bunch of objects in standard access. I've got some that are in the intelligent tiering, some that are infrequent, and a couple that are in the Glacier flexible retrieval. So you can get quite a lot of information about what's going on in your system. So that's the end of the S3 part. Are there any questions before, or do people want to take a pause before we jump into Code Whisperer?
Or like an intermission, go and get a Coke and a popcorn from the lobby.
No, I'm just taking a breath.
Let's go down to the lobby.
Oh,
Okay,
God.
never mind. I'm
Oh
done.
God, yeah. Horrible. Any questions? I know that was a lot of sort of deep information. Three, two, one. Okay, I'm going to switch the screen share to something else, to a different screen.
To artificial intelligence completing our code for us.
Yes. Desktop 2, desktop.
I
Oh,
wish.
there we go. Okay. What?
Patrick said, I wish.
Yeah. Like, I mean, if it would just automatically like snap my fingers and I could have all my code done, that would be great.
Well,
Not even close.
right. So this is IntelliJ. Can folks see this well enough? Okay. One thing I want you to notice is way down here at the bottom where there's the green checkbox and it says Code Whisperer. Keep an eye on that. Okay. So I'm going to delete some stuff and I'm going to show you how it works. So there's a couple ways that Code Whisperer works. And let me just actually back up and say, Amazon has an enormous, well, you can say Amazon has an enormous X where X is, anything, but they have an enormous code base and they have some confidence in their code base and they have access to lots of other code bases as well. And one of the things you need for good machine learning is an enormous amount of data. I mean, almost all machine learning is, here's a crap ton of data, go notice some patterns, go extrapolate some inferences from it. Amazon has enough data about code. I mean, think about how much source code AWS must consist of. And Code Whisperer will look at certain things you do and say, hey, I bet I know what they meant. So let's try this. So we say, I want a function to return the longest line in an S3 file. Now I'm going to hit enter, but look down at the green Code Whisperer area. It's spinning and it thought about it. Okay. And you should see in sort of gray, def get longest line from S3 file name. And I'm going to say, sure. And now it's created a function definition that will do that. And you could edit this function definition. You could remove the file name, you could change the name of the parameter, so on and so on. Again, look down where it says Code Whisperer. I'm going to hit enter again. It's thinking, it's thinking, it's thinking. And it's like, it gives me an option, or it's suggesting a bunch of code. Now there's actually, this is a preview, so it had a typo. But see what it did. It noticed that I had a function higher up in this class called getLines from S3. Get lines from S3. Something I wrote earlier on. Getlines, right? So I wrote this function early on. Getlines from S3. It knew that function was around, And it said, okay, well, to get the longest line from a file in S3, I can get the lines and then call max on it. So now this wouldn't be hard for you to write, but it's something that you don't have to write. You can, I'll show you some other examples. So yeah, let me just, it's just so fun to have it create these things. So I want a function to find lines that are in both of two S3 files. And it thinks about it. And it says, well, find lines in both files. And, it has two names. And it thinks about it. And there it goes. Again, this wouldn't be the crazy hardest code to write. But I bet at least half of us wouldn't get this function right the first time. So it's not for tremendously sophisticated things, but for fairly simple everyday things, it's pretty powerful. Another benefit of Code Whisperer is that it forces you to write good documentation. So function to find lines in both S3 files. That's a comment. That's the sort of comment I wouldn't mind seeing in my code because I know what it does. I know what it means. Down below, I wrote a comment that's more similar to the sort of comment, what light word can I say? Crap that I see in a lot of company software. Yeah, go do stuff with stuff. And Code Whisperer says pass, which I think is actually kind of funny. It can also be limited in that I asked it, go implement a sort. And it said, yeah, I'm not going to do that. But then I said, okay, I want a function to sort a hash map, and it gave me, not a terrible way to do it. And that's sort of the gist. And so I'm curious to see what people's thoughts are about that. And I'll say, it doesn't just have to be functions. You can put one of these comments, inside a function. It's like get, I think, here, I'll sort of the dangers of live coding. Get longest line. Okay, yeah, that's cool. That's kind of cool. So it isn't just functions. You can do, these basically things in the middle. So what do people? Just curious, what do people think about this?
Brian, is this only available for the Python extension, or there is Java extension as well for this?
I'm pretty sure there is Java. I've made a promise with myself that I will never again write a Java program, but that's just for me. And I just spent too many decades playing with Java. So I tend to, it's like when the cartoons, bleep out a bad word, I hear, oh, is this available? But having said that, Java is a wonderful language. I'm sure it's available there. It's Java and Python. The other languages are coming, and this is a preview. Code Whisperer is not publicly available yet, but it will be soon. I would be shocked if it wasn't publicly available by reInvent.
Yeah, listen, I see it as if as you said in your presentation, that AWS definitely has a humongous amount of code, and this sort of, if somebody is building it or learning the language, or need to sharpen some of the skills, this can give suggestions that this is how you should write, right? So you sort of acquire certain style of coding and such. That's what I see it as. That's one of the plus side of it, I would say.
Right, right. It's funny, I will say, and I'm not sure I've got it in here, but it has sometimes suggested code to me that's much better than what I would had come up with. And that in my Alexa skill, I'm often putting out a randomized string from a list of possible strings. You know, I have a list of possible ways to say the same thing. You know, so many goals were scored. How many goals were scored? This many goals were, you know. So I'll have a list of various prompts, and I've got some functions that randomize the prompts. And just for yucks, I put it into CodeWhisperer, and I didn't realize that random had a choice function that would directly do exactly what I wanted in a single statement, as opposed to calling a function. So, you know, even having used Python for a number of years, this will sometimes, you know, suggest new ways of doing it. I'm not sure if you can, if you could see in any of the examples that I showed, but it will sometimes give you different options. So it'll say, well, you could do this, or you could do this, or you could do this. And over time, it's only going to get better.
It's like your little buddy who sort of helps you improve your code, I guess.
Right, right.
Brian, does it? Okay.
No, go ahead.
So does it require? Have you tried to code, like to use it in your work, or no? Probably like work or like out, because it looks like this is an introductory by CodeWhisperer file. So have you tried to use it like outside? Is this like control setting?
Well, in this particular case,
Yeah.
Just for the demo, I have a CodeWhisperer test .py. I actually did start playing with it in one of my my side job files, and one of the things it does that I haven't decided whether I love or hate is it knows what all your other functions are, and it knows what your other variables are. And so, you know, I said, you know, I wrote a function in my soccer skills. We have something called the table, which is the standings. And I test wrote some function like, you know, get me the bottom 3 elements. And it said, oh, of the table? And I'm like, okay, that was a very good guess. So it knows a fair bit. I haven't played with it enough to know whether its guesses are helpful or you know, in the way. But it's definitely something to pay attention to, I think.
Do you need code before that, or you start? I mean, I guess you need to set up first portion of it, right? And then
Well, the thing is, I mean, it's I mean, actually, let me just I'll get rid of everything.
This is going to help you with the light lifting stuff, but what it's not going to help you with is with the logic or the architecture of your software. This is
makes sense.
This is a how to Google a little bit less for the dumb crap that you never remember. It's not going to help you with the deep thinking stuff.
Organization, yeah.
Right. It's not going to say, wow, you should send that message to SNS with a retry and a dead letter queue and yada, yada, yada. But what it is trying to do is, you know, take away some of the, you know, the little things. So again, you know, find the unique elements between these two. Well, I would have probably come up with that. You know, the list of the set minus the set. But I'll be honest, I probably would have thought about that for 2 or 3 minutes, you know, or just reading a file in S3. I do it all the time, but it's like, all right, it's an object and it's it's like, this is not a string. I want to commit to my frontal cortex. I want to commit it to my exocortex. So the computer. So
I was wondering where you were going with that. I was like, what's an exocortex?
oh, the internet, Google, Stack
Right.
Overflow, that's the exocortex.
Took me a second.
Yeah, so it's all these little things. It's like, do you spend your time? Yes, ideally you spend a lot of your time, or we spend a lot of our time thinking about the deep architectural things. But I think a lot of times we're also just, oh my God, just make it work. I think it's removing a little bit of the friction. So, anytime you can remove a low level friction, you're helping. I mean, I remember reading an article in Psychology Today ages ago that said, like there's always these double doors on buildings, and one of the sides is locked and the other one is open. And it's like, how stupid is that? You pull the one and it's locked, you pull the one and it's open. It's like, why the hell did you just burn 4 seconds of my life? And the Psychology Today article said, that's what drives people over the edge. So, in any case.
So, Vlad, to answer your question, and I know it's slightly sarcastic, the danger of Amazon copyrighted code in your code base. We actually had a conversation with them at the summit where we were asking them, okay, you are looking at millions of lines of code with tons of different kinds of open source licensing agreements. You've got MIT, you've got all of the different ones. How do we know when we're getting too close to exactly what somebody typed versus something that the AI kind of constructed on their own? And I haven't been able to replicate this, but they said that if you create a very niche case, it will actually pop up and say, we got this is really, really close to this, and you might want to give attribution for this particular couple lines of code. I thought that was pretty slick.
Yeah, I think that might be in the non-disclosure part of the talk that we had, but there's definitely going to be more pieces coming that we're not allowed to talk about yet. So this is definitely a work in progress. And there's a question about JetBrains and VS Code. It also, interestingly, works directly in the Lambda console. But I suspect, JetBrains and VS Code covers most of the market. So, once they do the GA, we'll see. But I think this is going to be, an evolution. It's interesting. There's some similarities between Code Whisperer and Code Reviewer. So I don't know if people have heard about, and this is just sort of off the cuff here, but Code Reviewer uses the same giant, repository of code you can add Code Reviewer as an automated reviewer of pull requests that you create. And it has a bunch of detectors that will look for bad code. And again, it's the machine learning looking at your code and seeing whether it matches some bad parameters. So that's interesting. And to Vlad's question about Copilot or Kite, I haven't used Kite. I have played with Copilot. I will say that there's a yin and a yang there, in that Copilot gives its results faster. You could see that our little spinning wheel took a few seconds, but Copilot does not put out the doc comments, and I really like the doc comments. So for me, that was reason enough to stay with Code Whisperer. But I think it's great that there are both products. They will compete with each other and push each other both to be better. Oh, okay. Any other questions? I'm going to share the results of the poll if I can find the window. Here we go. About a third of folks are first times here. Three people outside of Boston, one person outside the US, yay. A nice mix of experiences. About the same for certifications. And we're going to try to get to in person or hybrid at some point, but not yet. I think that's all we have. Any other questions? Oh, and we're still, we don't have our next speaker for next month nailed down. We've got a couple of irons in the fire. If you would like to give a talk, or if you know someone who would like to give a talk, doesn't have to be a full hour talk. It can be a, hey, this has been my journey to the cloud so far. It can be, hey, let me tell you about all the mistakes I've made. Those are usually really fun, entertaining talks. And I think that's it. Chris, anything else?
Your question?
Go ahead.